So let's take a walk on the waiver wire. Which fantasy free agents will be a thing come tomorrow in your league, Adam Ray?
Well, the big name is going to be Boston Scott because the availability of Miles Sanders is out the window for Thursday night's clash with the New York Giants. And Sanders played Boston Scott played 48% of the snaps against the Ravens in week 6. Corey Clement just touched the ball 8% of the time. And the Giants, you see it right there. This is a great matchup for them. So, you know what? I know we tried this earlier this season, and I can understand that people don't want to go back to it again. But with this opportunity against this defense, I think this has to be one of your top waiver claims.
All right, Adam Rank, I want to stay with the Philadelphia Eagles, but move on to the tight end position and talk about Dallas Goedert. Now, he is still available in 66% of NFL.com leagues, even though he started the season usurping Zach Ertz in Philadelphia. Now, Goedert will be returning from the injured reserve list this week after dealing with an injury, while Zach Ertz now joins the injured list, and Goedert takes back over as the tight end one in that offense. And the game's pre-injury, Dallas Goedert was averaging 15 fantasy points and saw 8+ targets.
Well, when you talk about people who have had 8+ targets, a guy who's had 8+ fantasy points in every game this season, one of just 8 wide receivers in the entire NFL to do so, is Keelan Cole, who had 9 targets versus Detroit last week, which was second on the team. You want to keep looking at these targets because then when you fast forward to the Chargers, which I project to be a high-scoring game, meaning the Gardner Minshew and the Jags offense is going to be passing late in the game, this is a great opportunity for Keelan Cole to help you out on your fantasy team. And by the way, the Chargers have allowed a top 10 fantasy wideout in 2 straight games.
Keelan Cole's been a surprising producer in Jacksonville. A guy who could surprisingly produce in San Francisco could be JaMycal Hasty. I mean, after Raheem Mostert went out last week with an injury, it was Hasty that came in and ended up leading the team in carries. Now, look, check to see if Jerick McKinnon is still available. The chances are he may be gone in your league. Plus, he's going to split snaps. The only other option might be Jeff Wilson, but he was inactive with a calf injury. It's not a sure thing that he's going to play this week, in which case JaMycal Hasty is set up to get a whole lot of opportunity in that 49ers backfield. All right, let's go around the horn and name your top 3 waiver options for this week. Adam Rank, we'll start with you.
Well, I want to reiterate, the question that you asked me is who is going to be the most added player? It's going to be Boston Scott, but I think that I'm playing for the long term, and 2 guys who are available on the waiver wire right now are Travis Fulgham and T. Higgins, who have the best long-term value. So while Boston Scott helps you this week, I'm looking long-term in those 2 wide receivers.
All right, well, you're looking long-term, but I'm here for the here and now. That is why Boston Scott is my #1 priority this week on the waiver wire. And then I completely agree with you, Adam Rank. I'm going to target Travis Fulgham second and then Keelan Cole third.
Okay, so I, too, am going to join the Boston Scott revolution, but he's my #3. I have Dallas Goedert at #2. And if you need a quarterback, and you probably need a quarterback if you had some guys like, ones that were maybe not starting anymore, like Ryan Fitzpatrick, then you want to take a look at Justin Herbert, who I project to be in the top 10 this week and in many weeks going forward.
Well, I think you're going to need running backs. That seems to be the theme of the year. So I'm going to say Boston Scott at #1. JaMycal Hasty is #2 for me. And third is Travis Fulgham because the guy has just been red hot over the last few weeks. Okay, so if we are adding, that means we have to be subtracting. So who are you dropping to make space for? Who are you making waves with this week, Adam Rank?
Oh, get lost, Kirk Cousins. We don't need you anymore. And listen, early in the morning, and I live on the West Coast, so back off, I was panicking because Kirk Cousins was not playing well, and I wasn't able to enjoy it because I would love to watch it when Kirk Cousins isn't playing well. But he was on my fantasy team because Justin Herbert was on a break, and so that's a good way to put it. Like Friends, he was on a break. No, he's on a whatever. The thing is, Kirk Cousins, we don't need you anymore. I don't like this offense. You're like the poor man's version of Jameis Winston now. But you're not even high end. You're not even going to get to 30-30. You're going to be like 20-20. You're a manager's special, the back of the restaurant or whatever.
What? I love it. The back of the restaurant, I don't know what that means, but I definitely know that that T.Y. Hilton is someone I'm putting on the back end of my situation to keep on my team. T.Y. just didn't get into the action. When you see Phillip Rivers throwing for 371 yards and T.Y. Hilton just really not getting any sort of action in that, and then I went and traced to see what was going on with his routes. He's totally covered. He's not getting open. This is not the T.Y. Hilton that we're used to. It is not a good opportunity in fantasy, and I'm a little concerned going forward because I don't think there's going to be 371 passing yards in many games this season.
I feel like T.Y. Hilton's still on rosters basically because of name brand at this point. And a lot of people maybe are stubbornly hanging on to Tyler Higbee. I think you can sort of let that one go. I mean, the good news is that he's playing nearly 82% of the snaps. The bad news is he's only running routes on about 30% of those snaps. The worst news is he's only targeted on about 20% of those routes. You don't have to be a math genius to figure out that's not really great. The Rams have a short passing game that's going to make him very touchdown dependent. Plus, you got Gerald Everett still working in there. This is just going to be too much of a roller coaster to consider having him on your roster each and every week.
Speaking of touchdowns, I wish this guy would actually score a touchdown and get me some points, but he hasn't done it yet. So I'm going to drop Marvin Jones Jr., but I'm going to drop him after this week's matchup against the Atlanta Falcons because I know, Marcus, you're going to talk about him later and say he has a really favorable matchup, so put him in the flex. So I'm going to do that, but if he does not perform, I am done with him and I am not looking back. He's only averaging not even 7 fantasy points per game, even with all the target share going his way. So kind of a disappointing one for Marvin Jones Jr., so I'm going to make waves and get rid of him after this matchup against the Falcons.
Knowing Marvin Jones' history, he'll have a 3-touchdown game once everybody has given up on him. All right, the dimming lights in the lobby means that it's time for another showing of overreaction theater. We're going to judge a whole bunch of fantasy books by their cover. First up, Adam Rank, Jimmy G, the next great 49ers quarterback. I mean, look, he's got to be right on the heels of Joe Montana and Steve Young at this point, right?
You know what? I can't even with you 49er fans because you guys are the worst. Like, no doubt. Like, last year he got you to the Super Bowl, and your response was like, we should get Tom Brady. Then he went out, had a bad game, and everybody wanted to cut him. And now he has one good game against the Rams, and he's back. He's back. He's a true 49er all of a sudden. Look, I think that he's going to be a little bit limited because of this offense. There's going to be games like this. He's not as bad as he was 2 weeks ago. He's not as good as he was on Sunday night. He's going to be somewhere in the middle. You just got to know when to play him.
Speaking of being as good as he once was, Cynthia, Phillip Rivers, he is a passing god after last week.
Of course, 371 passing yards. I told you about that. 3 touchdowns, and yes, there was an interception. This is his first game with 2+ passing touchdowns this season. In weeks 1 through 5, 11.04 fantasy points per game. That was number 30. So these were all season highs. I don't think this is going to be the case going forward. In fact, I would be really surprised if he went over 325 in any game. I went and checked to see entire ones going forward, all the projections that I have left. Nothing's over 325. So not a passing god, but he was for one day. It was like his one shining moment. And then now, you know, it's like the guy from college that comes back to high school. Then he's got to go back to college. Just be cool again, you know?
Oh, that's unfortunate. It's like Billy Madison wearing the denim jacket out in front of the high school. Kimmy, DeAndre Swift had his shining moment. He's the lead back from here on out, right? He is a set-it-and-forget-it running back for the Lions.
You know what? I kind of want to believe this one and not even say it's an overreaction. And let me start by saying this. Thank you, Michael S. Florio, for convincing me to get him in my starting lineup last week. It completely paid off because he had 2 touchdowns this past Sunday from 17 touches and 14 rushing attempts in that game. Now, though Adrian Peterson is still getting a lot of production in that offense, Swift is the goal line back who will continue to see red zone opportunities for the remainder of this season. So I'm bought into this one. But Marcus, you asked us the questions. Let me ask you one and switch it up this time. All right, overreaction theater here. Ronald Jones is the greatest Buccaneer running back since Warwick Dunn.
Well, duh, of course. I mean, you see what he's done the last few weeks. He's earned a workhorse role, probably even when Leonard Fournette returns. 100+ rushing yards in 3 straight games. Over the last 3 weeks, he is the leading rusher in the NFL. Leads the league in total rush yards over expectation. And he's got an incredibly friendly running back schedule for the rest of the season. Okay, so maybe he's not going to live up to Warwick Dunn over the long haul. But all the people who were sort of arguing that he couldn't get it done for any stretch for the Buccaneers, at some point you got to admit that, hey, this is turning out to be maybe better than we all anticipated. All right, so that's our dramatic reading of all the great performances. Now, let's turn and have some tear-jerkers of what we saw from the past week. We'll start with you, Adam Rank. Aaron Rodgers, he peaked in high school, right?
Yeah, that checks out. I agree with all that. Like what? Yeah, that's. Oh, you know what? I missed him on the Pat McAfee show today because I'm sure he was yucking it up, talking about like, oh, my bad years or other guys' career years. Like, bro, you couldn't even throw a pick six as good as Jay Cutler, and you threw two of them. And I know one of them they got tackled at the 2, but in spirit, in theory, that was a pick six. And you know what? I know it's easy to go out there and beat the 1-4 Minnesota Vikings, but you faced a good defense. This is what happened. Look at this. I just want to watch that. Where are you? You're not even chasing the guy. This is amazing. So yes, Marcus, I think you got it. You nailed it. That's an underreaction as far as I'm concerned.
All right. Cynthia, Odell Beckham Jr. is going to have triskaidekaphobia. He will not score more than his jersey number 13 in a week for the rest of the season.
I do math, but that mastery of linguistics that you just put on display was absolutely amazing. Congratulations. I can't even say the word that you just went to try to say, but I don't think this is true. I don't think Odell Beckham Jr. has any fear of the number 13. I think he's going to surpass that. Look at their upcoming schedule. They got the Bengals this week. You're going to be A-okay with OBJ. Everything's going to be fine. It was kind of a one-off. The Steelers defense is absolutely awesome, probably second best in the entire league. So this was just a one-off for me.
All right, Kimmy, DJ Chark, no longer, guaranteed, to start for you.
I kind of believe it. Okay, get the song out of my head. I do kind of believe this one because I think DJ Chark has started to become a lot more of a flex play dependent on the matchup because other guys in that offense are getting better pass catching opportunities. Earlier, we talked about Keelan Cole as just one example of that. Now, DJ Chark has only averaged 13 fantasy points this season and has made it into the top 30 wide receiver list just once. So, this may be true. But Marcus, back to you. I want to get one bad overreaction to tee up to you this time. Juju Smith-Schuster apparently retired before the game, and he just never told us about it.
Apparently, it must have been a very touching ceremony, which is why we're running highlights from other games in the past when he played, because apparently, I don't think he was on the field much. Look, he's kind of been turned into a possession receiver in this Steelers offense. I mean, he leads the team in targets and receptions, but really just 5 air yards per target, which means he's not getting downfield or giving him a lot of short underneath throws. And so it's going to be hard for him to put up huge yardage totals unless he has huge yards after catch numbers. And that just hasn't really been there. It's going to be frustrating. And at this point, this offense is sort of pivoted toward Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. So there you go. Time for a Monday night recap in prime time and off-peak performances, starting with those that lit it up under the lights. Kimmy?
All right, let's start off with Kyler Murray, because it turns out he is not only a quarterback, but he is officially the goal line back for the Arizona Cardinals. He finished with only 188 passing yards, but he threw for 2 passing touchdowns, and he ran one in himself. You just saw it right there. Now, with yesterday's finish, Kyler Murray has the 3rd most fantasy points by any quarterback through 6 weeks in NFL history, only behind Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers. So not so bad of company for the second-year QB.
Yeah, but I was on the receiving end of far too many battles with Kyler Murray, so I wasn't enjoying it as much as I was enjoying the last hurrah of Clyde Edwards-Helaire out there crushing it. 26 rushing attempts, which he turned into 21, nearly 21 fantasy points. And I know a lot of people have been upset over the last couple of weeks, or the last week or so, because once Le'Veon Bell came into the mix, people figured this was a swan song, like your final night in Vegas, and we're going to go big. But I have a good feeling that we're going to still see a lot more of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I know you're going to panic. Please don't. You've got a part of this Chiefs offense. You're going to be just fine.
You know what? What else you're going to be just fine with is Amari Cooper, who actually had 7 for 79 and a touchdown, which is kind of like one of those projections that I make when we're kind of forecasting, right? So I really like that. 10 targets, 20.9 fantasy points. That's 7th among wide receivers. He's kind of quietly had 16-plus fantasy points in 5 of 6 games this season. I don't think we talk enough about how consistent Cooper is. He's very quiet. He doesn't say a lot, but you know what? He's going to give you those fantasy points that you need, even with Andy Dalton, even in kind of a messy situation last night. This is one where you're going to keep him rolling, and when Andy Dalton gets a little bit better, which he will, this is going to be a good situation for you and remain a good situation for you.
Speaking of consistency, Travis Kelce reminding you why you spent an early round draft pick on him. 5 catches, 65 yards, and a pair of touchdowns for the Chiefs on a night where they didn't really throw the ball a lot or didn't throw it super effectively because they were running it so well. This is a reminder, though, you can start tight ends against the Buffalo Bills. 5 different tight ends have had top 12 weekly finishes against this defense. And where once we might have feared the Buffalo Bills defense, maybe avoided guys against them, I think now there are some spots that you can pick and have some success when you're playing the Bills. All right, so now to the off-peak performances. Adam Rank, who disappointed us yesterday?
Well, Michael Gallup played pretty well with Andy Dalton 2 weeks ago, and we thought, like, okay, maybe this is going to be a connection that we can count on. And he was targeted 6 times in this game and really just never seemed to have any sort of chemistry with him. There was, not really open there. He was still looking for him. So on one hand, I want to be encouraged that he was looking for. That's one that he just dropped. And so that's one that just would have changed the tenor of the game. He would have had, 30 yards at that point. That would have been a 7-yard touchdown pass. Would have had close to 10 points. So, I don't know. I'm not completely giving up on him. I don't think he's droppable, but I'm certainly not rushing him back into my starting lineup anytime soon.
Michael Gallup burned me last night. Kind of disappointing, but you know who else burned me? It was Josh Allen. I needed him to get over 30 fantasy points, and that's not what he did. He finished the night as QB number 17 on the week. Now, this was Josh Allen's season low in fantasy points and passing yards, only airing out the ball for 122 yards against that Chiefs defense. Now, as good as Josh Allen has been all season long, he's had 4 interceptions in the last 4 games combined. However, and a big however, I truly think that he's going to have a bounce-back game this week against the Jets. And if you stick around in the show, I'll give you my projection for him this week.
So I needed exactly 6 fantasy points from Tyreek Hill on Monday. 6. That seemed incredibly manageable. I got 5.5, so it didn't turn out well for me. 3 targets, 3 receptions, 20 yards. Yeah, okay. Not so great. This is his first game this entire season without a touchdown. I just needed 6 points, and I couldn't get it. I'm a little upset still. I'll probably get over it, but probably not. Next week, it better be better because I obviously can't do anything about it except for cry that it didn't work out yesterday.
Fantasy is such a heartbreaker. So those are the primetime games from yesterday. Next up in primetime, NFC East foes square off. It's Giants at Eagles. That's right. Week 7 kicks off with Thursday Night Football on NFL Network, Fox, and streaming on Prime Video. All right, turn to some headlines in case you missed it. The Dolphins are turning to quarterback Tua Tagovailoa after the bye week, which means the 5th overall pick will make his first ever NFL start in Week 8 against the Los Angeles Rams. So, Rank, please give us some fantasy perspective on what this move means.
Well, I think this is a pretty good move for the Miami Dolphins. We love Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's a lot of fun, but let's be honest, he's kind of limited as a quarterback. And what we're going to see out of Tua Tagovailoa is once he gets into the lineup, he gives them a whole new playbook, kind of similar to what Kyler Murray does for the Arizona Cardinals. So I'm not only encouraged by him, and I'm going to try to pick him up in spots where I'm going to need a quarterback, but I'm starting to look at some of the other players around him. In particular, I'm curious how this impacts a guy like Myles Gaskin, who's been playing very well this season. Now you put him with a dynamic quarterback. I think this can be an excellent little connection. And now I'm kind of seeing an uptick with this Dolphins all these offensive players.
They've been fun to watch. Curious to see how much more fun they get with Tua in the lineup. Elsewhere, our Tom Pelissero reports that Panthers running back Christian McCaffrey isn't expected to play Sunday against the Saints. That's according to sources. This means he will miss the 5th game since his high ankle sprain in Week 2. Word is CMC is close, but the Panthers are staying cautious with a Thursday night game against Atlanta coming up next. All right, it's time for Sweat or No Sweat. We're going to profile some of the tough matchups coming up in Week 7. And Kimmy, first off, it is Jared Goff going against the Chicago Bears, who are giving up the fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks with just under 12 per game. So sweat or no sweat for Jared Goff?
I'm sweating this one because he's taking on Adam Rank's Chicago Bears, even though Rank went on this preseason to say that Jared Goff was going to be fantasy relevant. But I digress. No, Jared Goff's performances last few weeks where he's had fewer than 15 fantasy points in 2 of 3 games. See, that's exactly why, Adam Rank. Get out of my segment. Okay, anyway, the Bears are really tough against opposing quarterbacks, allowing the fewest passing touchdowns in the league, along with the fewest fantasy points to QB, just under 12. So for a quarterback that's already been struggling fantasy-wise, I would look to bench Jared Goff and string someone else with a better matchup.
All right, next random rank, Josh Jacobs. He's back after the bye, and he's facing the Bucs defense, who are giving up fewer than 50 rushing yards per game to running backs. So sweat or no sweat?
Marcus, I'm sweating. Sweating like it's August in Las Vegas, and I'm making the walk from the Tropicana going down to the stage door. The best, by the way, the best place to watch Raiders games in Las Vegas, the stage door. Listen, they're friends of mine, whatever. But I still say that you have to start Josh Jacobs this week. Unless you have excellent options, most people drafted Josh Jacobs as your RB1. Perhaps if you were lucky, he was your RB2. And the thing is that sometimes your running backs have tough matchups, and you just got to live with it. So I'm sweating it, but I'm starting him.
All right, Cynthia, you were talking about Amari Cooper and his consistency earlier. He is at Washington, who give up the fewest fantasy points per game to wideouts. So sweat or no sweat?
So I'm sweating this one, but I'm still going to be playing Cooper. I'm just going to plan otherwise and look for some good ceiling plays. The interesting part here is that when you look to see other options and what will potentially happen in this really huge tilt in the NFC East, I think the Cowboys are really going to need to actually figure this one out and make it work for them. So Amari Cooper will still get the targets. I just don't love it. I'm going to, again, look for some ceiling plays elsewhere to insulate my potential to win because there aren't a lot of guys who have the consistency of Cooper. I just don't like the matchup. Only 3 touchdowns allowed to wide receivers, which is tied for the second fewest in the NFL.
Washington defense has been tough pretty much all year. I'll take Will Fuller, fresh off a 100-yard game, but this Sunday he's got the Packers, who give up the 4th fewest yards per game to wide receivers. But still, I'm saying it's no sweat on this one. I'm just kind of trusting the way they've used Will Fuller. 7 or more targets in 4 of 6 games. 100-plus yards in 3 games, touchdown receptions in 4 straight, double-digit fantasy points in 5 of 6 games. Basically, what I'm saying is that the Texans are getting the football to Will Fuller pretty much by any means necessary. And so I expect the target share is going to be there, and I expect the production should be pretty good for him as well.
Derrick Henrys 40-point fantasy game, the focus of my 5 this week, because today I'm giving you my 5 favorite players to put up 40 points. Now, at least one guy has been able to do it each and every week, and 2 guys were able to do it in weeks 3 and 4, but it is lucky number week 7. So let's take a look at my 5, starting with number 5, Kareem Hunt at the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, his best game this season was also against the Bengals in week 2, where he scored 24 fantasy points. Another guy who had a good game that day was Nick Chubb, who is now out with an injury, meaning Kareem Hunt can pick up the production for the both of them. When Chubb and Hunt were in that starting lineup against the Bengals this year, they combined for 50 fantasy points. All right, number 4, it's Tyreek Hill in a fun divisional matchup against the Denver Broncos. Now, Tyreek has had he's had a 40-plus fantasy point production only twice in his career, but he could easily make that a 3rd as he takes on the Denver defense that is allowing 38 fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. Hill has had 4 receiving touchdowns from Mahomes. All right, number 3, scary Terry McLaurin against the Cowboys. Now, though he's only had 2 21-plus fantasy point performances this season, the Cowboys defense is allowing the 6th most fantasy points and the 7th most yards per game to fantasy wideouts. All right, it's number 2. It's Josh Allen at the Jets. Now, I know that he had a disappointing Week 6 game, but that was in the past, and this week he has a great matchup versus the New York Jets. Allen has had 4 25-plus point fantasy points this game, and he put up almost 30 points against the Jets in Week 1. So let's add 10 more onto that and get him to a 40-burger. All right, and it is at my number 1 spot. It's Ronald Jones at the Las Vegas Raiders. He was my guy last week, and I went hard for him, which paid off, having his career-high game versus the Packers, finishing with 26 fantasy points. Now, the team behind the Packers in terms of most fantasy points allowed to the running back position is the Las Vegas Raiders, who are averaging 34 points to the position. So coming off of his high from last week, I am guaranteeing that Rojo will have another stud performance in Week 7. All right, those were my 5 favorites to score 40 this week.
Hey, Kimmy, it is time now for Higher or Lower with Cynthia Freeland. It is the home version of everybody's favorite game, which is pretty much what they give you when you have a really terrible day on a nationally televised game show. But this is not going to be quite as humiliating. We're going to put up a stat line, and Cynthia will tell us whether or not the player in question will go higher or lower. So we will start with Aaron Rodgers taking on the Houston Texans. He has over 280 passing yards in 3 of 5 games. Houston has allowed a 300-yard passer in 2 straight. So higher or lower than 285 passing yards for Aaron Rodgers?
Click that higher button for me, please. Draw the circle, everything you need to know. 292 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, 11 rush yards projected in this one. The interesting part here is that Aaron Rodgers' last game was uncharacteristically low. The Texans are giving up all of the yards, so this is a great get-right, bounce-back game for Rodgers in terms of touchdowns. 3 is quite a few. He's had 3 in 3 of 5 games this season. And you want to say, okay, Houston, you said 300 plus in 2 straight games. This is going to be the 3rd one, potentially, if you look to the ceiling situation.
Yeah, looks for a bounce-back spot for Aaron Rodgers here. Up next, Matt Ryan, who has 2+ touchdowns in half of his 6 games facing the Lions, who have given up 2+ in 4 of 5 games. So, Cynthia, higher or lower than 2 passing touchdowns for Matty Ice?
Marcus, it's my favorite moment. Please draw the star. I have 2 passing touchdowns projected for him. 288, 2 touchdowns, and an INT in this one. Detroit has allowed 2+, he said, in 4 of 5. Now, if you look to see kind of where, when, how, this is a situation where they're going to be passing the ball a lot. The Detroit defense is very targetable in the passing game, and it's going to be a Matt Ryan and Matthew Stafford kind of back and forth chess match in this one because both defenses are quite vulnerable.
Okay, up next is Boston Scott, who we anticipate will be a popular waiver wire ad this week if Miles Sanders can't go. Higher or lower than 75 scrimmage yards for Scott Thursday night against the Giants?
Let's go with higher. I have 99 scrimmage yards projected in this one, 70 on the ground, 29 through the air with 2 receptions and a touchdown. This is a very nice top 10 projection from a guy who we could potentially pick up on the waiver wire. You absolutely need to get him into your lineup in this one. 54 scrimmage yards in week 1 without Miles Sanders. That's not the one I'm looking at. I'm looking at the opportunity in this one and how you keep Carson Wentz from throwing interceptions. You know how you do that? You run the football.
Okay, so Clyde Edwards-Helaire, speaking of running the football, he ran it pretty effectively on Monday night, but Le'Veon Bell is expected to be in uniform and on the field for the Chiefs this week. So, Cynthia, higher or lower against Denver than 8 touches for Lev Bell?
Okay, I have a little bit higher. I have 9 touches. I have 7 rushes, 24 rushing yards, 2 receptions, 22 receiving yards. This is not a great projection here. Why? Because Lev Bell takes a bunch of time behind the line of scrimmage. And if you look to see where there have been injuries and what's going on with the Chiefs, their O-line has been quite injured. Mitchell Schwartz might not even be playing. We've got a lot of things to navigate in this one. So look for them to fold him into the offense a little bit more slowly. 9 total touches projected for me.
Can't imagine 2 more different running styles than CEH and Le'Veon Bell. Next is DeAndre Hopkins, who has 130+ yards in 3 of 6 games, facing a Seahawks defense who's allowing a league-worst 294 a game to wideouts. So, higher or lower than 100 receiving yards for D-Hop?
This sounds crazy, but I have lower. I have 7 receptions, 94 yards, and a touchdown projected, which is a great projection nonetheless. If you look to see what has been making everyone kind of come together and do better in this Cardinals offense, it's a diversity of different passing options because DeAndre Hopkins, he commands so much attention that's why Christian Kirk sometimes gets the ball or vice versa. So if you look to see, okay, let's see what this projection is, 794 touchdown, still an amazing outing for D-Hop.
All right, so I'm getting word that Juju Smith-Schuster apparently has unretired, and he is going to play for the Steelers this week. Now, he has fewer than 50 receiving yards in 4 straight games. Now he faces the Titans, who allow the 4th most to receivers. So higher or lower than 50 yards for Juju?
I have a little bit higher than that. 5 receptions, 59 yards in this one, not the touchdown projection. Just like you were talking about before, it seems to be the Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool situation in terms of red zone opportunities. I do think there will be the Juju Smith-Schuster game. I don't necessarily think it's against the Titans because the Titans have figured out sort of their backfield. We've seen their defense be quite vulnerable in certain spots. But I don't think the Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be the spot necessarily this week. It's risky.
he's definitely going to have to be a red zone target. Okay, we'll finish up with Rob Gronkowski, who scored his first touchdown with the Bucs on Sunday. He gets the Las Vegas Raiders, who allow more than 6 targets a game to tight ends. So higher or lower than 5 targets for Gronk?
I have a lower here. I have 4 targets, 3 of them being caught for 39 yards. Yes, we saw Gronk be the linchpin of what was going on with those intermediate passes for Tom Brady against the Packers. But if you look to see kind of in the past and recent past with Gronkowski, probably not going to be 2 games in a row that are Gronk games. We've seen a lot more blocking. We've seen a lot more targets to other catchers. Everyone's getting a bit healthier in the offense, so it's very hard to project that he's still going to, game after game, be the kind of receiving threat that we've kind of come to know him as in the past.
What's up, everybody? It's time for Breaking the Ranks, and it is time right now to start thinking about your playoff push. And I have 5 players you're going to want to have on your team, whether you make trades, you pick them up on the waiver wire, or anything like that. Let's start with number 5, and DeAndre Swift. Now, obviously, Michael F. Florio was talking about him last week, but I have to give deference and respect to Cynthia because she also called this, and it was a big reason why I got him into the lineup this week. And I'm telling you right now, what we saw this week is what we're going to see moving forward. So if you don't make a trade for him this week, you're not getting him. Get him into your lineup. Number 4, Justin Herbert, the quarterback of the Los Angeles Chargers. The best thing to come out of California since The Rock made San Andreas. Ever since he took over as quarterback of the Chargers, he has had at least 21 fantasy points per game, 22 in 3 out of his last 4. He's got a great matchup this week against the Jags. And again, this is somebody we're going to be able to count on for the rest of the year. And number 3, I'm going to put Juju Smith-Schuster. You know, Marcus thinks he retired. Cynthia's given him 60 receiving yards, but I think that he's just on the verge of breaking out in this offense. I don't think that the matchup this week is spectacular, although the Titans have allowed 4 top 15 wide receivers in their past 3 games. But I think that, you know what, he's been battling through some injuries, and in the next couple of weeks, we're going to see the Juju that we've known and loved. And speaking of players that we've known and loved, let's go to number 2, Chris Godwin. And I know, he's battled through some injuries this season. It hasn't quite been what we all expected coming into the year, but he is just getting started. I really do believe it was a little bit of an adjustment period for Tom Brady, getting used to these guys, getting acclimated to everything that was going on around him. And now this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team is going to be able to take off. So if you can find a way to get Chris Godwin on your roster, do it. And number 1, let's talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mentioned him early on in the show, and I know everybody was freaking out. Le'Veon Bell's there. What are we going to do? Listen, use that to your advantage. Everybody that has CEH right now is trying to sell high or do anything, or whatever that means. You go out and you make a deal for him right now and you get him in your lineup. And of course, if you have him already, then you hold on to him. You hold him, you clutch him, you hold him on, you hold on for dear life. Because Andy Reid showed us on Monday night that he also likes CEH. And those were my top 5, my breaking the ranks, whatever this segment's called. 5 dudes that you are going to want on your championship fantasy squad moving forward.
All right, we're thinking a little bit more short term here with our Week 7 flex time. Kimmy, who's got flex appeal this week?
All right, I want to talk about Travis Fulgham. He was a hot name last week on the waiver wire, and I absolutely think he needs to be started at the flex spot this week against the Giants. He's had a receiving touchdown in 3 straight games, but he's still only being started in just 7% of NFL.com leagues. Now, this is a week to get him in the flex spot because of the matchup against the Giants, who have allowed a top 20 fantasy wide receiver in 4 games in a row. So averaging 25 fantasy points per game in the last 2 weeks, Fulgham is a must-add and a must-start in the flex spot.
No, I agree with you, Kimmy. I'm surprised he's still available on the waiver wire, and if he is, you need to add him. And I know were you besmirching Marvin Jones earlier? Were those the words?
I was. Make a case for why I shouldn't. Make a case. Come on.
They're playing the Falcons. Case closed. That's all we have to talk about. We've seen time and time again, guys like DJ Moore have been struggling. They go and they play the Falcons, and all of a sudden, they're all pro again. So this is the one thing. I love this matchup. I love Matt Stafford. Kenny Golladay is amazing. This is going to be a huge game for Marvin Jones. He's going to score 3 touchdowns, and then he's going to score 1 touchdown the rest of the season. But this Sunday, it's going to be amazing.
It's about time we get one of those Marvin Jones games going on. We've finally gotten a couple of Christian Kirk games. After a slow start to the season, he's now second on the team in targets over the past 3 weeks, about a 26% share of the air yards. Cynthia talked about the diversity of targets in this Cardinals offense. Kirk is one of them. And yep, we're picking on the Seahawks defense again. They've allowed 8 top 12 receivers in their first 5 games, so this is a great matchup for Christian Kirk to try to stay hot for the Arizona Cardinals. What do you say we make a toast to fantasy players like the ones we just saw who gave us a reason to celebrate? Each of us will raise a glass to some fantasy class. First up, Rank, who are you toasting on this Tuesday?
Well, you know what? I want to toast Derrick Henry. And I know this toast isn't going to be as cool as whatever Kyle Brandt does for you. He gives you a crown and a scepter and all that stuff. But I want to toast you because, number one, PPR is stupid. It really is like the dumbest thing. We should be playing half point at best or whatever. And I love that you've broken PPR because nobody wanted to draft you. They're like, oh, he doesn't catch passes. And you know what? It's true. He's caught eight balls on this season. He is still the RB5 because he's a great running back. And a scat back like James White or whatever can't go out there and have as many points as you because you know what? Because you're so awesome. So, Derrick Henry, here's a toast to you and continued great run and success.
Cheers. You know, of all the wise things you said on this show, PPR stupid is up there near the top of the list. All right, Jimmy, your turn. Who are you raising a glass to this week?
Come on, don't ever give Adam Rank a compliment. But let me give a compliment. Let me give a compliment to Matt Ryan and that entire offense. Adam Rank was over here besmirching you and saying that he was going to drop you. And then you came back to fantasy relevance and you showed not only us, but you also showed Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones all of the fantasy points. So cheers to you, Matt Ryan. I am so glad that I did not take Adam Rank's advice and drop you. So thank you for that.
Cheers. Cheers to Matty Ice.
Talk about being besmirched.
All right, Cynthia, you are up next. Who's your Tuesday toast?
Mine is to Matt Patricia. Thank you very much for the DeAndre Swift help in fantasy. I really needed that one, especially in my analytics league, where, by the way, there's someone from the Lions who plays on that one. So I always really enjoy beating people with their own team members. That's my favorite part. Matt Patricia, thank you. I really appreciate it. And by the way, it doesn't often happen, so I'm going to point it out. Thank you for also winning the game as a Lions fan. You know, I just really made my heart warm. It just really gave me something to be excited about. So cheers.
Cheers. We're all looking for silver linings in 2020. As for me, I am going to toast Kirk Cousins for reminding us that garbage points still count. I mean, the matchup looked great. We all were expecting big things, but the first half was pretty miserable. Actually, he had negative points in the first half of that game this past week, but bounced back in the second half with 3 touchdown passes and a 2-point conversion. And when it was all said and done, he ended up having a pretty fabulous game. So Kirk Cousins, to you, as you slide down the banister of life, may all the splinters never point in the wrong direction. So there you go. Those are our Tuesday toasts for this week. And before we go to break, it is time for Riddle Me This. After his performance on Sunday, Justin Jefferson now has 2 games with 30-plus fantasy points. Now, since 1970, only 2 other rookie wide receivers have had more 30-plus point games. So who are they? We'll go around the horn. Cynthia, who do you think?
I'm going to go with Julio Jones and Megatron.
Michael Thomas and Megatron. That's a good one too. I like that.
I'll go with Randy Moss and Chris Collinsworth.
I'm going to definitely say Randy Moss.
He was a receiver.
One of them for sure. So, all right. So we will go. We got 3 minutes and 30 seconds to phone a friend. No Googling. Come back with the answer after the break. To answer our Riddle Me This question, before the break, we asked, Justin Jefferson has 2 games of 30-plus fantasy points. Since 1970, only 2 other rookie wide receivers had more 30-plus point games. Who are they? The answer is...
Oh,
there it is. Randy Moss and Odell Beckham Jr. That's what we probably should have got as well. OBJ, man, he had that ridiculous rookie season, and now we judge all rookies by that standard.
Yeah,
we should have known. Todd Mossberg produced this show. Of course it would have been OBJ. We should have known that just by that.
That's very true. And but you're absolutely right. We forget how great his rookie season was, and it's ruined him for the rest of his career because everybody expects him to have 2,000 receiving yards, and he's a bum if he doesn't.